Welcome to the Church Resource, where we talk about the best resources for pastors, leaders, and lay people. I'm your host, Jeff Oliver. We're looking today at a book called Elders and Leaders, God's Plan for Leading the Church. And this book is written by Getz, who is local to us here with the program. The podcast here originates from the Fellowship Bible Church North. That's what it used to be called, at least at the publication of this book. It's now called Chase Oaks Church, and that is, some of you might be familiar with that. Getz is still working there daily from my inside source, and I know that he's still working hard there for the kingdom, but for the church there at Chase Oaks. But this book, written several years ago, and it is obviously a perspective on how the elders, how the leaders of the church are to come together, how to lead the church well, how to look at even the role of elders and why that's important. Getz is very high on elders and elder rule, elder leadership within the church. So I think this is a great look, a great study. Really, it's pretty in-depth and a good defense of elders and using that as a way to guide and steer and oversee your church. And so I want to let you know about some of the contents here. He starts out with the foundations of biblical leadership, of elder rule in a church, and talks about the biblical frame of reference, talks about the principles that he is operating from, and how they started at Fellowship Bible Church, as it used to be called years ago, at the beginning of that kind of Fellowship Bible Church movement, and why they chose elders as the means of leading their church. And so he talks about that. He talks about this is in part two, it's called the biblical story. And what Getz does is just a masterful way that he goes about doing basically I'll say 120, 130 page Bible study on biblical leadership, on the beginning of the church. This is a great study in church history because it goes by chapter, goes through a different period in church history. He starts with AD 33 in the ecclesia of God, the very beginning of the church, as the church was founded in the book of Acts after the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus. He talks about the elders in Jerusalem. He starts at AD 45. AD 45 to 47, the healing and the prayer ministry of the church, and so on. So he goes for many chapters to talk about the historical development of the church and what was important at different points within that development, within the church body and the church globally. At that point, I know we're talking about a smaller region than global, but as the church started there in Jerusalem and then spread out across the continent there, and what was important to churches there and important for leadership, what was vital to them in terms of being able to lead the church, to do it theologically soundly, and to do it in a way that would be responsible and in a God-honoring way. So he really does a great job in covering that. Then he goes to a section called Scriptural Observations, and the titles, the teaching functions of an elder, the various qualifications of elders. He studies those passages, those pretty familiar biblical passages, but really goes in depth into teaching those and to unpacking what it means to be an elder, what would qualify and disqualify somebody in order to be an elder or leader in the church. He goes through some principles for leadership appointments, and this is, if you are thinking about nominating and selecting an elder for your church, I think this is a great book to be able to use that and just, use this as a checklist go chapter by chapter with that candidate and to see if, yes, is this something that you feel that you're led to do, that you're called to do? Is this something you're qualified to do? And just to let someone know up front what the qualifications, what the responsibilities, the expectations would be for an elder in the church. If you're not quite sure about elder rule and what does that mean, and maybe you're in a church that does that, and you don't quite understand what that means, or you're planting a church and you're thinking about how should we go about the governance of this church. What do we do in terms of being able to lead the church, and who has the authority here that is coming under the authority of Jesus? What do we do with that? So I'd say a good thorough study of this week-by-week study, if you would, for the people who are considering this kind of leadership. If you're already in that kind of leadership, to understand what it means, and maybe to strengthen and solidify your grasp on what it means to be elder-ruled or elder-led in a church. He has several appendices here that I think are instructive for us. There's a section in here in the book that is, I think, very helpful for us. He tracks the word ecclesia. He tracks the word church there and what that word is referring to. Whether we're talking about what we might call the capital C church, meaning the church universal, the broader church, the worldwide church. So that's one column, and then he talks about a group of churches as a church and a body of people in a particular region. And then there's another part of that chart that talks about where in Scripture that the word ecclesia, church, is used for one individual specific church. I think that's a helpful study for us, and something worth paying attention to there. He has some principles, practical applications here. How do we do this? Lots of questions for you to consider. One other thing to tell you about this chapter is there are principles that come out of this study that we need to have someone who is a part of a team, is demonstrated the ability to lead with a team and to be a part of a team, to have basic ethics and morality, to be a leader, a true leader, someone who we can see has been called to do that, someone able to teach, someone who leads in his family well. And so those kinds of things, 14 principles there that we can pull from those qualifications that are listed in Scripture. One other thing I'll tell you about in this book, and I think this is great, this is one of the appendices as well, and it is a kind of a survey determining a candidate's maturity quotient, he calls it. This is a whole chapter on just several questions, and I want to tell you some of these, they're supposed to be ranked from 1 to 7, dissatisfied to satisfied. First question, how do you evaluate his reputation as a Christian, both among fellow believers as well as among non-Christians? Rank that from 1 to 7. The husband of one wife, how do you evaluate his relationship with his spouse? Rank that from 1 to 7 on the potential candidate. Several pages of these questions, and then to be able to sign off on that, each person who has maybe selected or is maybe voting in, depending on how you do this, the elder candidate. This is, I think, great for the elder candidate to go through himself and to select here, how do I rank on these 20 attributes of an effective and qualified leader, an elder in my church? How do I do that? So 20 questions here. There are 1 through 7 rankings, and then you can see how someone stacks up there in terms of their qualifications. Again, many, many uses for this, whether you're beginning or thinking about changing your church polity to an elder rule kind of situation, maybe from the deacon board. That's the model that I grew up in and have been very fully convinced that there need to be deacons for the serving of the church. Then that's what they were. That's how they were begun with Stephen in Acts chapter 7, that we dealt with that. But also there probably is a need, I think, and Gene Getz demonstrates this very well. There are needs that arise within the church that need to be handled by an elder board. So this is, again, Elders and Leaders, God's Plan for Leading the Church by Gene Getz, a long time pastor and a faithful leader, follower of Christ. And so it's just one book on my shelf that's been helpful to me in my ministry. And I hope it gives you a bit of direction as you prayerfully consider which resources will best help you and the people you minister to. Well, thanks for listening to the Church Resource. Please make sure that you give us a review. And if you have any suggestions of resources that you would like us to look at, email us at thechurchresource@gmail.com. That's thechurchresource@gmail.com.